Hello, good evening, and welcome. I'm John Lazarus with Stories Matter and D&D Publishing. We all have fears we hold deep inside us. Some of them are universal, like my fear that one of my daughters will grow up to be a Twitch streamer. And some of them are unique to us, like my fear that my pharmacist will, at some point, cross paths with my doctor. Now you might be thinking, John, didn't you already do a video about this? Yes, but with Halloween just around the corner, I wanted to expand on some of those ideas. Plus, the comments on that video made me think that maybe I should give it another go. And to make this video extra scary, we're going to hone in on one of the biggest fears that most people watching this video have. The fear that we're a terrible failure who will never get anything published. So, in addition to focusing on mistakes, I'll also flash brief, demoralizing messages paired with some classic movie monsters. We're going to mash up some monsters and piss all over an Indian burial ground on this edition of Stories Matter. Speaking of horror, there's nothing more horrifying than attending a gala luncheon or a black tie event with jewelry that's dirty, stained, or crusty. All the horrible looks, the hush whispers, the drop monocles, it's every man's nightmare. Whenever I give a new girlfriend or escort my mother's jewelry before a night on the town, I always make sure to give it a quick bath in Black Diamond's steam cleaner, with its state-of-the-art quad-vection heating system. Unlike other jewelry steam cleaners, this one comes with a lifetime warranty and was rated by Jewelers Monthly as the least likely steam cleaner to melt the flesh off your hand. Call Jamoro today for more information. Before we get into the specific mistakes, there are a few questions you need to ask yourself before writing a horror story. First, you need to decide if the horror in your story is going to be literal or symbolic. Stephen King's The Shining, for example, would be a great example of a literal horror story. Here, the horrors are things we come across in everyday life. Getting lost in a hedge maze. Dealing with poor building maintenance. Your dumbass family getting in the way of your writing. A good example of symbolic horror might be The Indifferent Stars Above, about a fictitious group of settlers who resort to cannibalism on the Oregon Trail. On the surface, it's a story of survival against the elements, but really, deep down, it's a story about the dangers of Stalinism. The second question you should ask yourself is, what is the message of my story? More than any other genre, readers want horror to have a point. I mean, if you just wanted horror for its own sake, go on Twitter, or talk to your coworkers about politics. A story like Dracula, for example, wants the reader to understand that foreign aristocrats shouldn't be trusted and we should be wary of giving them diplomatic immunity. And The Exorcist wants the reader to understand that the Catholic Church is mostly populated by incompetent fools who cause more problems than they solve. Now, we're going to look at 4 common mistakes horror writers make by going to a veritable wellspring of bad writing. The students from my writer workshops, The Learning Annex. Mistake 1. Thinking of horror as its own genre. I used to tell the writers at my workshop, don't write a vampire story, write a coming-of-age story with vampires. Don't write a zombie story, write a bank heist story with zombies. As with anything, it's best to write what you know. There was one student in my class who was really having trouble thinking of a good idea. When I noticed that his check for my class fee had bounced, I told him he should write a sad story about a man who was a complete failure. Then he could add something about ghosts or monsters or a plague or something. The improvement was remarkable, and the only thing I regret was that I never got to see the finished product, as the family heirloom necklace he gave me to pawn to cover the class fee turned out to be fake and I had to kick him out of the class. Mistake 2. Making the horror too specific. You have to be careful, though, when you write what you know. You've got to find a way to make the horror universal. For example, I had this student who wrote about a serial killer who preyed on women because of underlying issues with his sexual inadequacy. Now, for this student, it made total sense to write about that. He was overweight, balding, didn't smell particularly well, and a quick look at his phone showed he was subscribed to almost twice as many porn subreddits as I was. So I told him that virile men like me wouldn't really connect with a villain like that. Fortunately, there are many fears we all share. Spiders, rising housing prices, all forms of hepatitis. Fear of immigration is another good one. And if you don't want to appear racist, consider making your immigrant villains white Canadians, like I did in my vampire novel, Canucks Amok. Mistake 3. Using a trope, but not playing around with it. Whenever we got to the horror section of my writing workshops, I had to deal with about a dozen haunted house stories. And for almost all my female students, it was always a metaphor for how shitty their husbands and boyfriends and fathers were. Because the people who ran the learning annex made me promise I wouldn't try to have sex with my students, the only other help I could offer these women was to get them to think of more novel, interesting ways to play around with the horror tropes. Ida Gustafson was an interesting case. She had written a horror story about a ventriloquist dummy who comes to life. I told her that was just a cliche, so instead she wrote about a woman whose sex doll becomes inhabited by the spirit of her dead husband. Mistake 4. Ignoring setting. A lot of the students at my workshops simply set their stories in nondescript suburban homes. And an even larger number set them, oddly enough, in adult classrooms with a demanding, overbearing, possibly demonic writing instructor. A uniquely spooky setting, if implemented well, can provide an unsettling atmosphere and increase the tension in the narrative. One of my students had her ghost story set in a forest, but once I got to know her better, I decided it made a lot more sense to set it in a place that she knew better, the Panera Bread where she worked. It turned out to be a lot creepier. That's all for today. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll leave you with this week's This Day in Literary History. See you on the next one.